And
Yep.
so I don't want to make it seem like an interview. So as soon as I start doing that, if I start doing that, will you call me names
I will never call you names.
and do the virtual stop it?
Yes, yes.
How often are you picked for things like this for people to kind of track your brain and see what your thoughts are about Native issues and
Quite a bit more
locally?
than
And
quite a bit more than I probably deserve. You know what I mean?
I don't think so. I mean, your your organization is right on the pulse of all the things that are happening, whether it's politically or just culturally or nuanced things happening, in the Bismarck area. It just seems like you're right on that pulse. So,
Try to be. I think I remember when I was younger and um kind of up and coming in journalism, and I would see articles about Native people, and they would always interview Mary Louise Defender Wilson. And I was thought, no matter what the topic was, and I always thought, gee, why do they, like there's so many other people that, like would
mhm,
be subject matter experts. And so I do try to make a conscious effort to, if it's something that I'm, you know, just know a little bit, and that's most of everything, I know a little bit about everything, you know what I mean? So, but if there's someone that I think can be a better spokesperson, I'll say, I think you should talk to so and so, you know what I mean? And
mhm,
because I'm conscious of it, because it at that time it was like it's really sort of tokenizing to have one person speak for on every issue when there's
mhm,
so many competent Native professionals out there. It's just a matter of they probably are not exposed to them, right?
mhm.
So exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so if it's general stuff like like this, and we're comfortable talking, I'm okay with that. But if you ask me like about, I don't know, oil and gas industry or something, I would say talk to so and so. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
there's a lot more in-depth stuff you can get into um, with someone else. So
If you're a little bit about a lot to be dangerous is what I'm hearing you say. Um
I don't know what dangerous.
in your
Dabble.
view, in your dabblings here and there that you know a bit about, um are there things, it's hard to speak for the whole, what you see in the state, only because the state is so varied.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's safe to say that even within the microcosms, even within the mini communities, within the communities, there's so many parallels.
Hmm.
Um, so speaking to Bismarck, um, and with this legislative session, there is a bill, that that about discussing introducing, like requiring Native American curriculum to be taught, not as an
Hmm.
elective, but this is part of the required curriculum. What are your thoughts about that?
Gosh. I thought that was I thought um it's a much needed bill. It's I was so glad that Representative Buffalo introduced it, um fully supported it, went and testified.
Mm-hmm.
Um and I'm a little bit disappointed that they're tinkling with it, and I'm disappointed that they're tinkering to the point that it's not going to be what it was intended to be, which was um, for us to learn about each other so that we could get along better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and some of the comments that I heard that legislators had made were things like, "Oh, well, we don't want to, aren't we giving voice to victimization?" And I thought, you know I think it's part of truth and reconciliation, and I think for the most part a lot of people in the state are still very much afraid of truth, and you know, are not interested in reconciliation. So unfortunately,
I
yeah.
I hear that, and I echo that. It feels sometimes like, yeah, we want to know about the history. It's really interesting. However, when we start to get to all of the history, to the complete history,
Mm-hmm.
then the stuff that doesn't feel good or shine a neat light, that's the stuff that we, you know, it's almost like, yeah, we know.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't need to keep, do you know what I mean? And
Right.
I struggle with that because that's not even reflective of how we are within our own families. Like nobody's
Mm-hmm.
perfect, right? And so the human condition is full of um uniqueness where, you know, gosh, we just excel and we have, you know, things that could be really celebrated on one side, but on the flip side, we also have things that, geez, we could work on, and geez, we shouldn't have done, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the whole lived experience. So if we're going to teach something, we have to be true to it. I mean, that's part of the truth.
Right. I think so much of you know, when you live in a very majority culture like we live in North Dakota, where, you know, there's very dominant culture and there's a very dominant perspective, I think that it's very easy to um, get caught up in this idea of what's normal, you know, what's normal.
Mm-hmm.
Early on in my career, I found this little cartoon. I thought it was really cute. It's this little chicken, and it's, you know, got all these little pieces of the eggshell around it. You know, it just had hatched out of its egg, and its eyes are just huge, you know, and the cartoon is wow, paradigm shift, you know. And I always thought that was cute because it's like we do here in North Dakota, we're still inside that little egg,
Mm-hmm.
and very few people get a chance to bust out of that egg, and the ones
Mm-hmm.
who do, you know, travel to other countries, you know, live in other places for extended periods, they're like, wow, you know, then you come back and you realize what a paradigm shift it is to go somewhere else and to come back and realize how, you know, how sheltered we are in that little egg yet, and we
Mm-hmm.
have not even realized that what we view as normal is not normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
um,
We have nothing to compare it to.
right,
We haven't
right,
been exposed to anything else.
yeah. And just we don't question the system, and a big part of that, of course, is because of our, you know, North Dakota culture, which is don't question. You know, it's a lot about obedience and
Mm-hmm.
you know, just follow the crowd and do what everybody else does. And so we never stop and question, you know, the whole system. What are we learning about, and is it really serving us?
Mm-hmm.
um I said I was going to mention this, so I will.
Yeah.
But one of the mind-blowing things that books that I read early on too was Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start realizing that this curriculum of history that you learned in school really only focused on one group of older white males and their experience throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you read this people's history, you realize there's children, there's women, there's Hispanics, there's Asian Americans, there's Native Americans, there's Black Americans, like where, like there's these, all of these different groups that were having um,
Their own.
their own experiences. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't learn anything about those, all of those different groups. We just weren't learn one little subset. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, you know, the fact that we never question that is it's detrimental to us as North Dakotans, because it keeps us in that little egg and never allows us to see that there are other ways of doing things, there are other ways of
Mm-hmm.
thinking, there are other ways of being. um, And so, yeah, I'm a little disappointed that this, I'll take it back to the bill, that this bill got really watered down, or is going to be watered down to the point where it's probably not going to be as effective as it was intended. So, yeah.
I like that you brought that up. You know, we don't question. It's just kind of ingrained in us. It's kind of our culture. I up until the last several years thought if somebody would have asked me, Amy, how do you think your education was? I thought I got a great education in Grand Forks. I thought it was wonderful until I started realizing all of these people that I never got to hear about, all of these peoples that I never got to hear about. And the world just, you know, it's your shell. It just cracked open like, well, what in what now? You know, and I was blown away when I would find out the nuances between different tribal nations, you know, because if we did learn about it, it was just sort of a big clump. And that, I mean, really. And then, so here's just this population, all of them, they were just like this, you know?
Yeah.
And then, you know, all of these amazing stories, you know, and even the language and the verbiage that was used as I think back on it, because I remember distinctly not being able to put the dot together from when slaves came over. They came over. Not they were stolen and taken over. And that language can help you understand things differently. You know, we don't want to be scary. We don't want, it's again, that truth thing.
Right.
Yeah. And so now, I mean, in the last few years, between learning about women and learning about the, you know, people in the Black community, and learning about people in the Indigenous community and all the nuanced, it's mind blowing. And it's such a disservice to everyone to not get a more enriching education.
I agree. It doesn't prepare us to deal with the world that's different. And I think that's, I say that all the time. I think because a lot of times when you advocate for, you know, teaching Native history and teaching about Native people and other groups, you know, diversity, things like that, it's often seen as, well, why do I got to learn about these other people that aren't me? And the reality is that, you know, by not learning about other people, you're not learning about yourself. And I think that's the big thing. And you know, that's creating that self-awareness. You know, you only become self-aware by seeing someone that's different or seeing other. And that starts to lead you to go, well, then who am I?
Reflect
and
a
how
little
am
bit.
I? Yeah, you do that reflection. And I think that's something that we don't give to our children here in North Dakota. We don't give them that opportunity to self-reflect. And I think it's doing them a disservice. It's not giving them a complete education. And that's really what it's about. It's not about indoctrination. We're not trying to, you know, convert you to become Native American or whatever. We're trying to help be self-reflective, because we have to live here together. You know what I mean? And it's important to know things about other people. So.
And it's interesting that you say that, because that really is kind of a mentality. You know, why do we have to learn about these other people? You know, why do we have to, who are right here, right here. So we're all in this together. And yeah, it's that feeling of other. Do you, in your experience, do you think in Bismarck that sense of other by a majority population has gotten better or worse? That might be a loaded question, and if you're not comfortable answering it,
no,
you don't have to.
I'll answer that question the way I guess, because I get that question a lot about, oh, well, do you think discrimination has gotten better? Do you think it, you know, whatever has gotten better? And I always say, if you're an abused child, is getting beat up 3 times a week better than getting beat up 7 times a week? You know,
Wow.
um,
That's
so
profound. I mean, really, wow.
so I say the same thing with, we always got to keep working, because it's, no matter what, it's always going to be impactful. As long as there's still a problem, then we got to keep working on it. You know what I mean? And so when it comes to, racism and discrimination, or even the putting it in more strengths-based terms, learning about diversity and learning about ourselves and being self-reflective, that I don't think there can ever be too much of that,
Mm-hmm.
because we're always going to have people who resist. So, yeah.
I wonder where that resistance comes from. I think as human beings being wired to be social, I have to believe that doesn't come from innately a negative place. Innately, I wonder if it just comes from um, learned behavior and fear of not ever knowing anything different.
I think it's social conditioning. I would say a big portion of it is social conditioning, because if you look at, children, they'll get along with anybody. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? They don't even see skin color a lot of times. They just see, oh, here's a little kid that I want to play with.
Mm-hmm.
And they, oh yeah, maybe he looks different. They might note that, but like it hasn't become a social construct yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of what we learn about are those social constructs. And for us in America, I think a lot of it goes back to this sense of, especially when it comes to Native people, this sense of dispossession. So we're here because we pushed somebody out. And I think, how do I want to say this? The fear that came from the legislators that, oh, aren't we teaching victimization? They weren't worried about teaching victimization. They were worried about being held accountable to land theft and to resource theft. And I think that's the discussion that they didn't want to hear. That's what they didn't want to talk about. And that's understandable. I mean, they don't
Giving
want to
voice
talk
to something gives power, right?
Right,
And so
right.
they're worried about that power, maybe.
Well, yeah, I think what they're afraid of is, if we say that, yeah, this is land theft and we don't have a right to this land, then you're going to want it back. And then we're going to have to give up something. We're going to have to give up some sort of power. And that's the biggest fear. Because if they were afraid, the people who learn more and realize we don't have to give up power, we are, as Native people, I think Black people, I think most minority people are not looking to have power over anyone else. They're looking for equity and equality. But I think the fear by the majority culture is, oh, that somebody else is going to be the majority. Somebody else is going to have to be the ruling or whatever. And so the fear then is they're going to have to give something up if they acknowledge this, the things that were done to all these different groups. So I think that, and in most recent years, we've probably learned this more than anything, that it really isn't so much about color as it is about economics, money and economics, right? So the income inequality is our biggest challenge right now, but it's really easy to deflect and show color, because color plays such a big part in income inequality. So I think that's why there's a fear there to talk about reconciliation, to truthfully acknowledge that maybe land in North Dakota was ill-gotten.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, we live here together. Things are the way they are. We're not going to be able to turn back time. So how do we go forward? By having those tough conversations. And I wish more people would realize that, that if we had those tough conversations, that's where healing comes from. The longer we deny, the worse it's going to get. It creates that inequity that we don't need. I mean, we shouldn't be promoting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You what are some positive things that you've seen in the youth that you're working with in Bismarck, and in the work they're doing in the community?
I think just the whole social movement, like youth are probably more connected than they've ever been to kids from other places, from other communities. That that isolation because of social media and because of technology, they're not as isolated as they were. And so it's just being able to be part of a larger social movement, I think really gives them some empowerment, and thinking, I'm not alone in this. There are other kids in other communities who are feeling the same way and doing the same things. And so I think that's a big part of just that raising that awareness and feeling more comfortable. So and that's not just youth. I think that's a lot of adults too, who are starting to see that there's a there's a bigger world out there. And certainly the protest, for all its pros and cons and everything that happened, the No DAPA protest really raised that awareness of, we're no longer in this little microcosm. We're part of this bigger world of issues and connectivity, right?
Truly the world. I mean, it's all over the world. It's so heartening and kind of awe-inspiring, really.
Right.
When you think of the environmental movements, you think of indigenous and sovereign movements, you think of school safety movements and gun reform, weapon reform movements. Like, kids have been on the forefront of these things, and
right. Yeah, it's exciting. Yeah, it really is. It gives me a lot of hope because I see even my own kids, like being much more involved at their age than I was, still like, duh.
I know, right?
When I was that age, right?
I figured it out too late.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's great.
exactly.
I was on social media. Well, I'm on fairly often. And a few weeks ago, there was a conversation that didn't end well, where somebody, a white person, asked for information about why something would be considered discriminatory or racist. And then they were provided education by a person of color and did not want to hear that and argued with them. So it just got me thinking, like, that was supposed to be a safe place where people can, commune with each other and have a safe space, but that ended up not being very safe for people of color anymore because of that. If we want to come together and if we want to learn more, and we're not getting it in schools because now anything that passes is going to be so watered down that it won't be as robust as we need it to be. Where do you suggest that white people go to ask maybe embarrassing questions, maybe things they should already know, with a good intention that they truly just don't want to make someone feel bad, or inadvertently be racist. I mean, we just need to say it. So what would you suggest as a person of color? I mean, you can't be, you know what I mean? It's not your job to be, I'll answer that question for you. So
I get what you're saying, because I think there's a growing movement among people of color to say, it's not my job to teach diversity. It's not
Right.
my job to give you the answers. That's your work that you have to do. Because, you know, the saying goes, racism and discrimination are the only problems where the victim, you know, the responsibility falls on the victim to correct it, you know, and there's some truth to that, you know. I think it is, when we think about racism and discrimination, we think, oh, it's their problem. It's a, you know, it's people of color's problem. And no, it isn't. It's this whole construct that we have made in the United States, and the founding of the United States is based on this construct. So I think there's some truth to that. But I also think that a lot of people reach out through social media because it's quick, it's easy. That, you know, let's just, you know, kind of like, let's drive up to Burger King and, oh, I'd like to order some, you know, bicultural education or whatever, you know, like, and can I get a side of, you know, American Indian history, and, you know, and
Jeez.
that's
that's perfect. That is like the perfect analogy. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
You know, that's our society. And so we think that that's, you know, it's going to happen in social media, but you know, really a safe place is with a person you trust. And so that's why that, you know, like having personal relationships is important. Like, you know, you could ask me what would be considered the most racist question in the world, Amy, and I would answer you with all the love in my heart, because I love you as a person, and I would not be offended, because I know you know what I mean, and I know that where you come from. Somebody, you know, driving up to the multicultural, you know, drive-through, I don't know, you know, I'm probably not gonna have the patience for them and the love for them, and I'm not gonna be, you know, as patient with them as I would be with, you know, people I know and trust and love. And so I think that's where, you know, again, social media, there's some good things about it, but there's also some bad things, because it does give us that false sense of camaraderie, or that false sense of connection, because we're not actually connected. You know, we're talking with a computer. We're not talking face to face with a person that we trust and love. And so I you know, call me old fashioned, but I think that's just, you know, like having those friendships and actively seeking out those friendships is critical, is important, you know, and those are the safe spaces.
I think I really take your point. I agree, because again, as social beings, I want to see your face when I'm talking to you, because you may tell me something, but your eyes might tell me something even more than what you're conveying with your words.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And I think there's so much communication in that.
Right.
I think of some of our super rural communities who don't have a lot of diversity in their small town, and and some, I had a conversation with someone, and I, in my heart of hearts, believe this to be true, that he genuinely would like to know more, and he would like to be a better human. And when I say that, that's not to say that he's not great, but he realizes his shortcomings because they've never been called out to him before. But when they were taken so graciously, and he was so earnest to want to know more. And I'm not the person to speak to that. And so do you have ideas on networks or organizations that people could reach out to maybe start knowing more about that agency, maybe starting those initial processes of making those connections, eventually forming relationships? If somebody wanted to, what would they do?
Like it's this shameless, totally shameless self-promotion. But I mean, the Sacred Pipe Resource Center, when we started quite a few years ago now, one of the first things I did was create a cultural competency series of workshops. And I did one each month. And then the next, I didn't have as much participation I really wanted. So the second year I did like every other month. And again, I was like, you know, here's a safe space where people could come and ask questions and talk, and really didn't get the participation. Maybe it was a marketing thing, I don't know, for whatever reason. But I do try to do that because as a white passing Dakota woman, I feel like I have that ability to help, you know, kind of bridge that divide. I, you know, being what we call biracial, or, you know, historically half-breeds have always had the role of being a translator, because they, you know, they could live and be among white people, and but they also knew the language. And so they'd often play the role of being that translator. And so I kind of feel like that's the role of Sacred Pipe and myself, is like trying to be a translator. So a lot of the workshops that I did were really about helping people understand, you know, the foundations. I did a lot of workshops that talked about values orientation, because I think in our modern world we think, oh, you know, Native people, they only look different from us. They still, you know, they're speaking English, so they're like us. They're driving cars, so they're like us. They're, you know, wearing suits and ties, so they're like us. They you know, they do everything that we do, so they must be just like us. But they don't realize that there's still a lot of cultural underpinnings that and cultural worldviews that really cause some tensions, because they're you know, sort of opposite of what
juxtaposed to,
yeah. So I think that's a big I think that's just creating that greater awareness, and like you said, creating that safe space where people can ask those questions. Because I feel like you know, I'm getting to the age where I can not be offended at questions. You know, sometimes when you're younger, you know, your first inclination is to get angry, and you learn over the years that, you know, you're not you know, just don't get offended. You know, you're going to do better if you can understand where they're coming from and why they're asking the question the way they're asking it. And a lot of times it is because their values are being threatened. And so if their values, if it feels like you're threatening their values, they're going to be resistant to the answer. And so how do you get past that? You have to recognize that, and you have to address that before you can actually get to a good conversation. So it goes back to, you know, having somebody trusted in a safe space that you can actually talk to, and you can clarify things, where it's very difficult to do that on social media. Right. When you're in a conversation with someone, you can say, well, what did you mean by this? And you said this, and this is what I heard, but that may not be what they meant. So you can have a better understanding when you're doing that face-to-face communication. So I have been thinking during the pandemic of starting that series up again, because I think the pandemic has really revealed a lot of that, you know, the need for more conversations like that. So
I would agree. I hope you do. I attended a couple of those sessions in downtown Bismarck, and I thought that they were really, really informative.
Thank you.
That is such, it sounds like you've identified sort of passing as white or being biracial, it sounds like you found that to work for you as a strength. Do you think that helps you stay on the pulse of what's kind of happening in Bismarck and around the state, and on how you can engage like your Native youth and people who are involved with Sacred Pipe to make those positive changes in the community at large?
I think so, because again, really, like the big focus of the work that I'm doing right now with the community councils is really how do we bring, so the community councils are groups of Native people in the community who want to address socioeconomic systemic issues, such as housing.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to bring together people from the housing system in order to help. We need to have allies. They need to come together.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't just throw people together, because the whole communication thing is, it just, it's really hard. There's distrust, there's, defenses, there's things like that, misunderstandings. So what we're trying to do is develop a process where we can prepare people to talk to each other. What do they need to know before they can effectively talk to each other? And
My
so
gosh.
they're going to go through, each group is going to go through a training, a training process designed by the other group, to, here's what you need to know in order to communicate effectively with us, in order to have a good, fruitful conversation. So they're going to prepare each other, and then they're going to come together, and then those groups are going to be facilitated before they actually get to the problem solving phase. And so this process is designed to help, build that trust before they even get together, to help build those understandings before they get together, to kind of get that foundational education and knowledge in place before we get to, talking to each other, and preparing ourselves to talk to each other too. It does take, working together, especially cross-culturally, takes some trust and some humility. And
Mm-hmm.
so we need to build those things before we actually have a face-to-face conversation. And I think that's just trial and error,
Mm-hmm.
from, I've been doing this for a while. And so that's just trial and error. So, we're working on this project in this way now, just because we know other things have not worked. And so a lot of it has to do with that. Yes, we have to prepare each other to talk to each other, because we can't just sit down. We're not talking the same language.
That's
We're not
so
speaking the language.
brilliant. That's truly a fantastic way to prep this so that it's going to be fruitful, and understanding that truly communication breakdown is just sort of the source of all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think that does come from, being sometimes involved, as off-reservation, urban Indian, being involved in like primarily majority culture groups and seeing how they interact, and then being among your own people and in, informal types of groups, and
Mm-hmm.
seeing the vast difference between how they operate. And it's like, there needs to be some prep time before you bring them together, because otherwise, again, they're speaking different languages. So
Well, and also I think without that insight that you have to prep them for each other for fruitful communication, without that, boy, you're risking souring any.
right.
I mean, if there
Yeah.
was distrust already, boy, is that going to be,
Yep.
fostered further with
Yeah.
something like that. Do you see, what are a couple of the biggest communication differences that you see between a more urban, a majority culture and?
Yeah, the first thing that pops into my mind is this idea of storytelling, because as Native people, our tradition has been to be storytellers. So as part of my dissertation, I developed a Lakota Dakota model of oratory, which is how we do public speaking. And so how we do public speaking is storytelling, is we tell stories in order to be able to connect with the audience and create an emotional connection, to tell people what our lived experience is, and to share, to share in the spirit of this is what my experience is. And so, but in our majority culture, especially here in North Dakota, we're very work-minded, right? Get to the point. What is it that you want? How do you quantify it? And what's the bottom line here? Cut to the chase.
Here's our agenda. Here's exactly what we're going to talk about in the order we're going to talk about it.
Yes, exactly. And that, that impatience, not following the agenda, that bugs people who have to be, very agenda oriented and cut to the chase and really don't have a lot of patience. And then the people who are trying to communicate by telling a story get offended when people aren't willing to listen to a story and to listen to you. And so that to me is like the biggest communication barrier I think I see among groups, and have seen throughout my career. No matter what kind of group it is, I've seen that dynamic happen quite a few times. I even had one time after I did a workshop, I had a guy come up and he said, geez, why do these Native American people always have to talk about history? They have to bring it up and they have to tell this big long story. And I said, because history is a part of who we are. History impacts who we are today. You can't, the longer you deny that and the longer you silence that, the worse your conversations are going to be. It's almost like therapy. Like, we have to tell these stories. We have to make sure that you acknowledge that, this is why things are the way they are, is because of what happened in history.
It's value. It's important value.
Right. It's important
that you're sharing through your communication.
Right. And it's not just a retelling of history. It's by you stopping and listening to that story, you're acknowledging that person's story and that person's reality. And I said, every time you try to shut that down and not hear that story, you're making it even harder for them to communicate with you, And so I hope that behavior was changed. I think he's, like he said, it was helpful. So, but I think that is probably the biggest difference that I see.
That's fascinating. And I can completely see how that would just completely, any communication is going to be deteriorated if we're speaking the same language, but we're not speaking the same language.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's what I've always said. We're both speaking English, but we're not speaking the same language.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Do you find that that is a value that's instilled also in young people, to speak in terms of stories and to have that historical component? Or do you think that's something that is it?
Yeah, I think it's just something that we, that's the norm, that's what we consider normal. And so, and we see it in all the different variations in we see it in all different types of relationships. So when a student in the school system, geez, Johnny, why didn't you bring a pencil? Well, my mom this and my family this. No, why didn't you bring a pencil? They want a direct answer. But for a Native person, we got to tell you the backstory. We got to explain to you what led up to me not having a pencil. And I'm trying to tell you that, but a teacher, no, I just want to know why you didn't bring a pencil. You know what I mean? Like, so they're just a short little, example. Again, two people speaking English, but speaking completely different language. And so when the teacher cuts the student off and says, oh, I don't need to hear all that back stuff, I just want to know this. To the student, then that's disrespectful, because they're trying to answer the question and they're not being allowed to answer the question, and neither side understanding the dynamic that's happening there, and why that student feels the teacher is being disrespectful and doesn't like them. And then the teacher wanting to know why the student is bringing all this other stuff up, or making excuses, so it leads
Wow.
to a lot of little everyday sort of what we call microaggressions, or these miscommunications, things like that, I think.
Wow. And those are so easy to be perpetuated over and over until we just understand each other.
Right.
And we could understand each other if we're allowed to learn a full story about everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, this was great. Is there anything that you wanted to chat about that I didn't ask you about?
I think going back to this whole notion of learning, and I think people that come from the dominant culture feel like if I learn about other, I have to, if I want to improve race relations, or if I want to be understanding, or whatever, culturally competent, I have to learn about other. And so I have to learn about African Americans, and I have to learn about Asian Americans, and I have to learn about Native Americans, and like, why do I have to learn about all these different people? And I think that the reality is, you do not have to have an encyclopedic knowledge of all these other cultures. What it all boils down to is this idea of cultural knowledge, right? Like, do I have enough knowledge of myself, and security in who I am, and humility to be able to interact with people who are different from me in a respectful way? And I think that's what the bottom line is as a Native person, if I go down to the Southwest, I'm as lost as any white person with the Zuni or the Navajo people, because I don't know about the Southwest cultures. But I do know that in my culture, I, am differential and respective until I know what the protocol is, right? I don't come in there and try to tell them what to do and how to act, or use my own lens. So I'm going to go there, and I'm going to find someone I can trust and ask them questions. What should I be doing? How should I be acting? And I think that's part of, I don't think any minority person from any minority group expects you to know everything about their culture, but they do expect you to come with humility and an openness to learning, and an openness to just being a human being and being a friend. And I think that's I think that's the bottom line, right? We don't expect people to go out there and, take a training on every culture there is out there. That's just not feasible. But, every culture out there does appreciate respect and humility and open-mindedness. So
I love it. And just an addendum maybe too, that a reminder that it's not all like, we're all together. We're all together. So it benefits us all when we're aware and treat each other with humanity and respect and an open heart, and to learn about you is valuable. It's super valuable. And to just remember that it's not something we're tasked to do. It's something we should have the opportunity to do.
Right. I think about that a lot, because we have all these different, these new things, new ways of doing things. So this whole concept of wellness now, and being well, and self-care and things like that. So I saw this thing a couple years ago. It's like, oh, there's this new practice. It's called earthing. You take off your shoes and you walk on the earth, because earth emits this energy, and this energy helps revitalize your whole immune system and all this stuff. And here's the science behind it. The earth actually does emit this energy, and I was like, oh my God, if you look back to our ancestors, They said that. They said, sit upon the earth because your mother earth cares for you. It's important for you to sit on the earth and to absorb the energy of mother earth. And they said that way back when, and people laughed and said, oh, those silly Indians. And and now it's actually a thing, and so
Do you think there's do you feel that I told you so? Do you feel that come up a lot sometimes? Like
the petty part of me says that, yeah, we told you, but the mature part of me says, there's so much more we could have learned from each other, and think about the society we could have built. How much better of a society that we could have built had we had the humility to learn from each other, instead of trying to, say one is better than the other, right? So yeah, I think that's a big lesson that we continue to struggle to learn.
I think also of someone shared a story about how trauma was dealt with. And, for example, maybe they would, come back to their tribe, and there would be ceremony, and they would share what happened to them, what they did, and people would dance, and there would be it would be ceremonial, so that what they said was out loud for everyone. Nobody questioned, nobody undermined, nobody, they just had the floor. And then everyone as community in that tribe partook in that ceremony with them. So they were validated. They got to share what happened to them, put it out in the open. They were validated, and then they were embraced in their community. And geez Louise, didn't we go full circle again? I mean, that's another, for the love. We're just wrapping around that again now, and it's always been there.
Yeah. I think there's so many things that I see today, these, like new practices. We say, those are things that we've been saying for a long time, and a lot of those are things that were taken away from us. You can't do that anymore. That's not the way we do things. You can't practice that. And those were a lot of the healing things, and so we're trying to bring back, revitalize, reclaim all of those healing ways, so that we can have conversations like this and be honest, and and be build together back up again. You know what I mean? So I think that's important.
I love it. I so appreciate you, Cheryl, so much.
You.
You're one of my most favorite people.
Right back at you, girl.